You want answers?
I think I'm entitled to.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth! Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's gonna do it? You? You, Lieutenant Weinberg? I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You weep for Santiago and you curse the Marines. You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know, that Santiago's death, while tragic, probably saved lives, and my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves lives. You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. We use words like honor, code, loyalty. We use these words as the backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way.
Every summer, the movie industry tries to produce some movies that they hope will become summer blockbusters. Movies that make it really big, at the box office. And sometimes they succeed, as when they did E.T. and Jaws and Harry Potter, but more often than not, it seems to me that they have a bunch of summer duds instead of summer blockbusters. And I know this summer they're really counting on having some blockbusters, and whether they do or not, one thing is for certain, and that is that movies provide wonderful entertainment. Because movies are simply a story put into a visual form. And everybody loves a good story. I love great stories, and when you put them into movie form, it is always exciting and fun to look at those movies and to see them. And when you take a good story and you put it into a movie, that movie can affect you in a whole lot of ways. It can make you laugh, it can make you cry, it can make you happy, it can make you sad, it can make you angry, it can make you depressed, it can even inspire you. I remember when the blockbuster Smokey and the Bandit came out. This will date me a little bit. But I remember when that movie came out, that movie inspired me to drive a different way going home than I did coming to the theater. I drove home much faster, didn't slow down on the corners, and said, I've got to get a Trans Am. It just inspired me like that. And movies will do that. They kind of just inspire you, and they'll take you places you've never gone. And some movies get such a hold on you and inspire you so much, you watch them again and again and again. My all-time favorite movie is American President, and I bet you I've watched that 50 times, and I'll probably watch it again this summer. Even though I know how it's going to end, I love that movie. And then, of course, there's movies that they have those catchphrases. Those phrases that just kind of become a part of our culture. They become a part of our vocabulary. Let me share a few of them with you this morning. I'll bet you know them all. The first one I heard on TV last night. I couldn't believe it, knowing what I was going to share with you today. I heard this on TV last night. Here's the first one. Wax on, wax off. You know the movie. And then this one, you all know this one. I'm the king of the world. Everybody remembers that one. Go ahead. Make my day. Fall asleep during my sermon. No. Go ahead. Make my day. We're not in Kansas anymore. There's an old one, but we all hear it and we all know it. This one, may the force be with you. What about this one? Here's looking at you, kid. That's an old movie. I've never seen that movie, but I know that phrase. It's a very popular phrase. What about this one? You talking to me? Are you talking to me? Show me the money. You hear that all the time. Show me the money. Came from a movie. Houston, we have a problem. Scott said that to me this week. I couldn't believe it. I said, I'm going to say that on Sunday. This one, Yo, Adrian. You remember that one from Rocky? Yeah, Yo, Adrian. Yeah, we all know that one. And this one, I feel the need for speed. This is one of my favorites because I always feel the need for speed. I love that one. I feel the need for speed. And this last one, you all know this one, Bond, James Bond. That phrase is so common. And there are all these phrases that come from movies And they get into our vocabulary long after the movie is gone. We're still saying those things. It's amazing. And the movie that we opened up this series with is a movie, A Few Good Men. And it's one of those movies that has some phrases in it that we still remember. Jack Nicholson will probably always be known for "you can't handle the truth," or "you need me on that wall," you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall. They're just part of the phrases that stick with us. And I love movies. I love stories. People love stories. And the interesting thing is that the Bible itself is chock full of potential blockbuster movies. It really is. Some of those stories in the Bible have been turned into blockbuster movies, like the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. That's a classic. It's old, but we've all probably seen it. And then modern day, the movie The Passion of the Christ. There are just so many good stories in the Bible that really lend themselves to the movie screen that really should be told. And so this summer, Scott and I are going to take you to the movies. We're going to share with you some of the blockbuster stories in the Bible, and hopefully we'll be able to tell them in a way that you'll want the sequel. Some of them you'll be familiar with. Some of them you probably will not be familiar with, but hopefully we together this summer will have a great experience learning some great stories that are applied to our everyday life. And the one we want to get started with today is the one from that little clip at the beginning, A Few Good Men. And the movie and the story from the Bible that we're going to use the same title from, that's the only similarity between these two stories. The storylines are completely different. The title is the same, story is different. In fact, the storyline from the Bible's version of A Few Good Men, I think, is more intriguing and more interesting and more enjoyable than even the storyline from the movie. It's just that much better of a storyline. And this story, has all the ingredients necessary for a summer blockbuster. It's got hatred and envy and jealousy. It's got politics. It's got a malicious attempt to murder. It's got a scene with nail biting and pillow grasping because you're not sure what's going to happen to the heroes in the story. And it's got a killer of an ending, that one of those endings you don't expect. It's just got everything you need for a summer blockbuster. And the story took place 2,600 years ago when King Nebuchadnezzar of Assyria, and Assyria is modern-day Iraq, he attacked Israel, and he defeated Israel, and he took some of the captives back to Babylon, and Babylon was a major city in those days. It's located 94 kilometers from modern-day Baghdad, and he took many of the people back there, even some kids. And there were 3 boys in particular that he took back. And those of us who know this story, as soon as I tell you who it is, we don't realize how young these guys were when they were taken from their homeland and taken into a foreign country. They were between the ages of 11 and 13. They were just boys, but they were good boys. And they were raised in good homes. And they were strong boys and wise boys, and they believed God. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these were the kind of guys you want to raise, the kind of guys you want your daughters to eventually marry. And when they got into Babylon and they began to teach them and instruct them, they became exceedingly wise. They were wise in the things of life, and they were smart in organizational skills, and they had the great bodies. They were strong, and they were handsome. In fact, they were so winsome. They were so all Canadian boys, really, that King Nebuchadnezzar put them in charge of Babylon. Well, which really infuriated a few of the natives, because here are these immigrants coming in, taking their jobs that they should have, and these guys get these high-placed jobs, and they're jealous, they're angry over them, and it's beginning to heat up. And that's where our story begins. It begins in Daniel chapter 3, where King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Now, 90 feet tall, it's about from the floor there to the ceilings, about 40 feet. So it's twice that high and another 10 feet on top of that. It was huge. And 9 feet wide, it's solid gold, and it's in his own image. The guy's very egotistical. He builds this huge statue of himself, and he sets it up on the plain of Jura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials. He sent it to all the who's who. Everybody that he could think of, he sent it to them, and to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." I mean, this guy had to be the first dictator, and a vicious dictator. He builds this statue of himself 90 feet high. He's very egotistical, and then he demands that everybody bow down and worship, and if you don't, you're going in the furnace. And the furnace is not some little kiln. This is a huge furnace. It's likely that he melted all of the gold that built the big statue. They melted that gold in this huge furnace. So he says, if you don't bow down, you're going in the furnace. And so what happens next is that the sound of the musical instruments all play, and all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. It's interesting, he says, all the people. It's not quite accurate. All the people did not bow, and this is where the story really gets interesting, because what happens next is that some of the astrologers, they were the local leaders in the city, and they went to the king and informed on the Jews. This is kind of interesting. He informed them, they were the first snitches. They're the first tattletales. I mean, they want to get rid of these Jews. It's not the Jews, it's really Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He wants to get rid of these Jews. They want their position. They want their jobs. And so they go and tell the king that these guys aren't doing what they're supposed to do. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace." The king already knew this. They weren't telling him anything new. He had already watched as they all bowed down. He had seen it. He had passed this decree. This was the part they were really trying to remind him of. They're trying to just get it fresh in his mind that if they don't bow down, people are to be thrown into the fiery furnace, because what they really wanted to tell him was this: "But there are some Jews," again, not some people, not some citizens, but some Jews. It's not really some, because he says they name them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And people who are angry and people who are jealous, they often do that. They over-exaggerate what's going on. Some Jews, it wasn't some, it was 3. You often hear some people say, everybody's against this. Well, if you begin to count and find out who exactly is against it, it's not everybody. It may be 3 or 4, but it's not everybody. So they're telling them all the Jews, but it's just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you put in charge of the province of Babylon. He's kind of taking a poke at him. They pay no attention to you. That was a lie. They disobeyed this one order, but they paid attention to him in other areas, but they're trying to overstate their case. They don't pay any attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. And so they tell this to the king, and the king, of course, is angry. Who would defy his order? So he immediately tells them to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in, and he's steaming mad. But as it takes time for them to get there, he's starting to cool off, and he's beginning to think, I like these 3 guys. These 3 guys do a lot for me. They really improve the bottom line. They're doing a great job in looking after Babylon. I don't want to throw them into the fiery furnace. How am I going to get out of this? And so he's trying to think of how he can do that. So when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego arrive, the king looks at them and says to them, "Guys, you know what the law is. You were supposed to bow down when the music started, and you didn't do it. And the law says you're supposed to be thrown into the fire, but I like you guys. You're doing a great job for me, so I'm going to give you a second chance. We'll play all that music stuff again, and if you'll just bow down this time, we'll forget the whole thing ever happened, and we'll just go on our way. So we'll just play the music, and you bow down." And everybody in the courtroom, except for those who had brought them forward to have them put into the fiery furnace, they're all hoping they bow down. because these guys were popular. They were nice guys. They were good guys. They were doing a good job. And they're all hoping, guys, just bow down, just bow down. And even the king is thinking to himself, guys, get me off the hook here. I don't want to throw you in the fiery furnace. I've given you a second chance. Take it. Take it. But before the music could even begin to play, it's interesting that Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego spoke up. Here's what they said. They said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you." They said, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. It's an amazing statement. Here are these guys. Maybe they're in their early 20s at this point. They're standing before the king. The king's sitting on his throne. It's very intimidating. All his court is standing around. And he's telling them, look, you are supposed to bow down. If you don't, you're going in the furnace. They saw the furnace. They knew what it looked like. And they knew he had killed other people, and he could throw them in a heartbeat. But they stand there, and they look at him, and they're totally unfazed. It's like he's invited them to dinner, for they feel like there's no threat to them at all. And the reason why they feel like there's no threat is because they believe that their God is able to save them. They look at the king and they say to him, look, king, we don't need to defend ourselves because our God is able. He can save us through the fiery furnace. You can throw us in, but it won't burn us. We're going to be okay. Our God can actually save us. And they didn't even stop with that. Not only did they say he can, they go on and they say he will. God can and God will. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. I mean, you talk about swagger. These guys had it. I mean, they're standing before the king. The king's ready to throw them in the fiery furnace. The leaders want him to throw them in the fiery furnace. And they're saying, hey, look, no problem. Our God is able to save us. He can do it. He will do it. I mean, they're looking at him basically saying, you can huff and puff, but you can't blow our house down. I mean, we're invincible. God is for us. You can't hurt us. Na, 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 na. You know, that's basically what they're saying to him. And you know, if the story had continued along that line, I think it would have been a good movie. Probably would have been a 3 or a 3.5 star movie. But it's what they said next that really changes this story. It's what they said next that changed this story from a 3.5 to a blockbuster, a solid 5. Because look what comes out of their mouth next. But even if he doesn't, our God is able, and he will save us. But even if he doesn't save us, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never, ever serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Well, I'll tell you, when you hear that, and if you are watching that in a movie with good actors, I'm telling you, the chills would go up and down your spine. I mean, that's amazing. You talk about courage. I mean, you talk about lines to remember. But even if he doesn't, I mean, these guys are putting it right out there. This is the kind of courage you hope your hero will have. That their courage and their faith was not based on having good circumstances like many times ours is. These guys were for God no matter what happened. They knew that God was strong enough and powerful enough to save them from even a fiery furnace, but they also knew that he was not required to do that. And so they wanted the king to know, and they wanted the whole court to know, that whether God chose to save them or not, their God was not for sale. Their faith was not for sale. They were standing true. I'm telling you, you don't have to be a Bible believer. You don't have to be a follower of Jesus to be inspired by this story. I mean, think about this. This is the kind of courage that you want to see in every hero. This is the courage, the faith we want to see in ourselves. In fact, it's the kind of courage and the kind of faith that people who don't go to church expect people that do go to church to have. And yet so often we don't. You know, they think we serve God because of what it will do for us. They think we follow Jesus because of what he does for us. And if the circumstances should change and he doesn't do exactly what we want him to do, we'll leave. And you know something? There's some truth in that. How many people do you know who have walked away from either the church or from faith in Jesus Christ because God didn't do something they thought he should do? Maybe he didn't, save their child. Maybe he didn't save their spouse or their parent or their siblings. Maybe he didn't save a good friend. Maybe God didn't change their circumstances so that they weren't in bad circumstances and were in good circumstances. Maybe they're angry at God because, he didn't prevent an accident from happening or a tragedy from happening. He didn't put a bubble around those they love and they care about, and they got sick and they died, and then they're angry with God. He could have stopped that. Why didn't he do that? Maybe they're angry with God because they didn't get a certain job or a certain house or whatever it is. I'll tell you, the list of people who have walked away from the faith of Jesus Christ because God didn't do something they thought he should do or did something they thought he shouldn't do is a very long list. It's a long list. You might even be on that list, or you might know somebody on that list. But I'll tell you this, the names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not on that list. Whether God did something or didn't do something for them, they were his guys. They were all in no matter what. I mean, it was kind of a gutsy thing to say, but even if he doesn't, they're standing right there in front of the fiery furnace, and the king who can kill him to just stand there and say, but even if he doesn't, we're not denying him. That was gutsy. That's the kind of line that a director in a movie longs for. Because he knows that's the kind of line that will catch people's attention and will inspire people. And as good as it is, it seemed at first like it was a foolish statement to make. Because when these guys showed this kind of swagger in God, they showed that kind of confidence in God, it infuriated the king. That they would be so defiant as to say that to him, that he called his men and told them to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. And then he had them bound up. And then he told his soldiers to pick them up and throw them into the fire. And the fire was so hot that when the soldiers got close enough to throw them in, they were consumed by the fire and they were killed. It was the worst possible scenario for these 3 guys. Here they were trying to do what was right. They were not worshiping some false god. They were trying to honor God. They were telling God is great and God is able, and they're going to trust him no matter what. And yet the king heats up the furnace 7 times hotter, and they get thrown in. It almost looks like the worst kind of a movie as far as I'm concerned. It looks like one of those movies, where the heroes die in the end. I hate those. I love good endings. I'm sorry. I'd rather have a good ending than a true ending. I just like good endings. And this looked like one of those movies. It's not going to be a good ending because there they are in the fiery furnace. But that's just part of the kind of the roller coaster ride of this movie, this story that makes it a summer blockbuster. For they had no sooner got into that furnace than the king jumped off of his throne and he yelled out, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did." These are the guys that brought them forward and had them thrown in. They're saying, "Yep, we threw all 3 in there. They're in there." But then King Nebuchadnezzar says, "Look, I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god." Nebuchadnezzar's blown away. He's in absolute shock. He's expecting to hear these screams of men being burned alive, but he looks in, and it's like he's looking into a room because these guys are not in pain. These guys are not consumed. The ropes are off them. They're walking around as if they're in an air-conditioned room having a good time. And not only are they in there, but there's somebody else in there with them, and that person doesn't even look to be human. It looks to be a god. He's in absolute shock. But the interesting thing is, the 3 Jewish guys, they're not in shock. They may have been surprised that there was an angel with them. In fact, some people believe that angel was Jesus himself. They may have been surprised at that part, but they weren't surprised that they were walking around free. They're looking at each other and saying, "I told you so. I told you so. No, I said it first. We're free." And they're walking around and the flames aren't. He says, "Watch this." And nothing's happening. They're free. It's an amazing story, an amazing picture. And so Nebuchadnezzar immediately says to them, he moves towards the flaming furnace, gets as close as he can, and shouts, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God." He says, "Come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. You read that so easily, but you got to picture that. Pretend you're the director. How are these guys stepping out? Have you ever walked on hot pavement in the summer in your bare feet? Have you ever been at the beach in August when it's really hot and the sand is hot? I mean, you're kind of walking like this because it's hot in your feet. You'd expect these guys to be coming out like that their feet wouldn't get burned. But they didn't come out like that. They just stepped out of the fire. They just walked out of the fire. They were perfectly fine. Nothing was affecting them at all. And as a result, the high officers and the officials and the governors and the advisors all crowded around them and saw that the fire hadn't touched them. In fact, not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. I mean, these guys are going around as if they've seen a freak show or something. They can't believe what they're seeing. They're not dead. They're not hurt. There's no smell of smoke. They cannot believe what they're seeing. And you talk about a good ending to a movie. I mean, the good guys win and the bad guys lose. That's always a good movie for me. And that's how it is in this story. The good guys win, the bad guys lose. And it's even better than that, because on top of this, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they teach us a truth that the whole world needs to know and understand. And that truth is simply this, that Christianity isn't a crutch for the weak. Have you ever heard people say that? You know, Christianity is for the weak. I don't need a crutch. You know, that's for weak people. I don't need that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were anything but weak men. They were the epitome of strength and of courage and of boldness. They were wise. They were smart. They were emotionally and physically fit. These were the kind of guys that are voted most likely to succeed. You know, their faith wasn't a crutch for them. What it was an enabler for them. Their faith in God enabled them to face danger, to face intimidation, to face the very threat of death with courage and boldness and a sense of swagger about them. Man, that's amazing. It changed them and how they acted because it enabled them to act that way. This is an amazing story. And you know something? It gets even better than that. Because, you know, when you look at that fact that he enables them in that way, you know, it kind of inspires me. I don't know about you, but it inspires me. It inspires me when I hear this story and when I read it every time. Like my favorite movie, I've read this story many, many, many times. And every time I read it, I'm inspired. I'm inspired to be more bold in my faith. I'm inspired to not be timid in letting people know that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm inspired not to be shy about praying over my meal in a restaurant or in some public place. I'm inspired to, you know, stand up for the values and the principles of God's teaching. It inspires me that when things don't go the way I want them to, when God doesn't do exactly what I think he should do, it inspires me to still have trust in God. To not say, God, if you don't do this, I'm not going to follow you, but rather, God, no matter what you do, I'm going to be yours. I'm following you. My courage is in you. It inspires me in that way, and I hope it inspires you that way. And the best part is the story doesn't even end there. The credits aren't starting to roll up. Because after they come out of the fire and they all look at them and they find out there's not even the smell of smoke on them, what happens next is that King Nebuchadnezzar promotes them to a higher position in the country. Now, I know I shouldn't feel this way, and I'm hoping God will forgive me. But you know, when I read this part, I'm kind of picturing to myself, if I was there, I'd love to be there. Because I think I'd find those guys that wanted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace. Those guys are standing over there in the corner. They're bowing their heads. They're feeling bad. They're sucking their thumbs. They're feeling sorry for themselves. They wanted those guys' jobs, and now he's just promoted them. And in fact, maybe they did get their jobs, only now they've got to answer to a new boss. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, you can't script it any better than that. There's not a writer in Hollywood that could write as good a story as this one. And you know what the best part is? This story is not even based on a true story. It is a true story. From start to finish, it is a true summer blockbuster. It's an amazing phrase. But even if he doesn't, I can't wait to use that phrase. You know, when I'm wanting God to do something, I can't wait to be able to say to God, but even if you don't. I can hardly wait to share it with somebody else when they're going through a tough time, and I encourage them, but to say, but even if he doesn't, God is still your God, and he is still true. Man, I can hardly wait to use that phrase. What about you? It could change your life. It could strengthen you in your walk with God. It could give you a courage that you've never had before. It could give you a sense of confidence that you've never had before. In fact, it would give you a swagger that you need as you serve the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, because He is able to save you from a fiery furnace. But even if He doesn't, He's still God, and He's still your Father, and He's still going to take care of you. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, I'm so thankful for these three men, and I'm so thankful for what they went through. I'm so thankful, Father, that you didn't save them before they got into the fiery furnace, because then we couldn't relate nearly as well with them. Because we all have experiences of life that are kind of like a fiery furnace experience. And we get scared and we get hurt and we're not sure what the future is going to be. And if those guys hadn't been thrown into the fire, we would have thought you favored them, and our lives are so different. But you waited to save them until they were in the fire. So, Father, I pray that we today will be inspired by their example to adopt the phrase, but even if He doesn't. That we as your followers would serve you no matter what. When things are going real well and when things are going real badly. When things happen that we can't understand, and when things happen when we wonder, well, where are you, God? Father, may we remember this great phrase from this great summer blockbuster. But even if He doesn't, I will never disown my God. My faith is not for sale. It cannot be shaken, for it is in Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think or even imagine possible. So, Father, may we walk out today with a swagger about us, not because of who we are, but because of who you are. For we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks so much for coming this morning. I think you're going to enjoy the series. Next week, Pastor Scott's going to share the next one in our series, so be sure to come back next week as we continue our summer series in the Summer Blockbusters. We're going to have some great stories together. Have a great day. It looks like the sun's coming out. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the Lord.
Can we get back to